Hold up. There is one more thing I want to talk about before we get to Suicide Squad. Silent Hill. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, this stood with Resident Evil as one of the pillars of Japanese horror. But, in case you weren't aware, it's been stone cold dead as a doornail since 2013. Some would argue 2003. PT obviously being a entirely separate conversation. What once stood as the pinnacle for psychological character and location design and the unbeaten champion of trauma dumping was reduced to ashes through a couple of mismanaged attempts to capitalize on the success of those first 3 games. But Silent Hill is currently in the midst of a bit of a resurgence. There's a new mainline game on the way called Silent Hill F, which I believe is meant to take place during the Showa period of Japan. Please excuse the white man's pronunciation, which should take place between the mid-1920s and the late 80s. There's Townfall, which we don't know a ton about, and then there's Silent Hill Ascension. We'll get to that at the end of the video. I think, as most people would expect, most eyes are on the Silent Hill 2 remake, which will kind of just set the tone for how the entire revival is going to go. But this already kicked off back in January with the year's first PlayStation State of Play, where they both revealed and shadow dropped Silent Hill: The Short Message for free on the PlayStation Store. Yes, I am fully aware it's currently the end of March as I write this, but it's been a busy couple months, leave me alone. The Resident Evil video did not help. Anyway, Silent Hill. If this is a genuine taste of what we have to come, I think people can afford to be cautiously optimistic. The Short Message may be very short, clocking in about 2 hours, but it's quite sweet. I mean, short and sweet is as in the phrase short and sweet. There's nothing sweet going on here. But before we get into the game, a quick disclaimer, a very heavy disclaimer. Silent Hill has never been one to shy away from taboo or very disturbing subject matters. And the Short Message is very much the same. It spends a lot of its runtime tackling issues like suicide, self-harm, and general aspects of abuse. So if those are issues that you struggle with, I would recommend turning right around and coming back to whence you came, or at the very least, educate yourself on what this game is actually delving into. Fortunately, the game is conscious of how important these issues are. There's a warning message that includes relevant hotlines should you need them. It plays when you launch the game, when you start a new playthrough, at the end of every chapter, and at the end of the credits, so you can't miss it. Alright, consider yourself warned. Now let's take a look at Silent Hill: The Short Message. The Short Message does not waste a second of its runtime, jumping almost straight into gameplay after a short, very spooksome cutscene where we get our first look at the infamous spot that has become known for the suicides of teenage girls, which is a great way to set the tone for the game and this video. Anita, our protagonist, wakes up in a derelict apartment complex known as the Villa. You will come to fear the Villa. She does not remember how she got in, and all she has with her is her cell phone. And now we begin with what all these games begin with: walking. Anxiously. Gameplay isn't much to write home about in general with the Short Message. It's mostly just like a walking simulator with an interact button to open the game's many doors and read the game's many scattered pages, which can range from world-building newspapers, trigger warnings for mentions of COVID-19, and diary pages to flesh out the characters. I don't find the lack of much to control really a problem with the Short Message. Storytelling in this game is much less about how you interact with the environment and more about how you go through it and how it guides you through it. The further you go into the game, the more apparent the environmental storytelling will become. The environment has a habit of morphing and changing around you. The sticky note room early on is a really good example, and they do this a lot as a way to deepen the layers of the narrative through the environment. The location work in the Short Message is excellent, and it's a very strong component in the themes coming across fairly naturally in such a short time span without literally whacking you over the head with them. It also goes a long way in helping to understand the events of the narrative. It's very much a story about unraveling what is going on here, especially because our protagonist Anita can be quite an unreliable narrator. The last little pillar of this mystery is your cell phone. Not only does it act as your torch throughout the game, it also plays host to your messages from the other 2 key characters, Maya and Amelie. It's quite the effective device at drip feeding information and twisting your view on the events of the narrative, which begins with a message from Maya, who it appears we have come to the Villa to meet. Maya is a rising street artist who uses the Villa sort of like as her studio, as her personal studio. She is somewhere within and is almost guiding you through as we go around and see a lot of her major pieces. This is sort of how they get you used to the base area of the game. Time that is used wisely to construct the basis for the mysteries of the game and the characters' relationships, such as Anita's jealousy of Maya, her status of BFF with Amelie, and her history with parental abuse. The standard structure of the game has you exploring a fairly limited path to reach a stimuli which will then deepen the layers of the mystery, your understanding of the characters, and the events that have led Anita here. And some of these sections are very well delivered, especially through the game's looping level design. It's sort of like a time loop situation. But it's not just a walking simulator, it's also a running simulator sometimes. See, I always check the control scheme of a game before I start it, partly because I'm a sad little nerd and I find that stuff interesting, and partly because I just like knowing what buttons to press. The short message does not have an extensive list of controls, but I would like to draw your attention to the bumpers. There's a quote by Alfred Hitchcock. It goes something along the lines of, "There is no terror in the bang, only the anticipation of it." I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty good at handling environmental horror. In fact, I quite enjoy it. But I don't know if I'd ever say I was prepared to open the door and find that chucklefuck standing at the end of the corridor. The game likes to label these sections escapes, and this is where we see the other half of the Silent Hill aesthetic. Literally caged in and surrounded by Anita's trauma as we book it in the other direction. These are pretty good sections in terms of how they divide up the gameplay. They always come at a good spot thematically or narratively. They tend to hammer home the big moments, and technically the way you get to watch the world kind of change around you is really satisfying to watch, even if it does dip into your frames a little bit. Obviously, with such a short game, they don't take a lot of your time, but they do try to make it worth your while by increasing the complexity just a little bit each time, which is where I have a little axe to grind, because the last escape is a tragic section of gameplay. It's no longer just running through a maze like the rest, now you have to find 5 photographs. On the surface, it doesn't seem like it would come across as a problem, but in practice, it is mind-numbingly tedious. Between trying to find the photographs and loop the monster like it's Dead by Daylight, it's just a lot and unnecessary. There is a sort of radar mechanic for the photos. Your phone flashes a picture with increasing frequency the closer you get. I didn't find it was all that helpful, partly because you have to be pretty close before it even starts flashing. Plus you're running through tight corridors with a pretty shallow FOV and you're going pretty fast. It's not hard to lose your bearings. There's very little about that last escape that doesn't irk me, to the point where I looked up a guide for it because I didn't want to spend double my entire playtime on the same maze. Plus, I found 4 of the 5 pictures on the first time. I just couldn't find the last one. The rest of the escapes though, they're fine. They're pretty decent spikes of adrenaline, and like I say, they do a good job of hammering home the bigger moments narratively, and they certainly contribute to the whole sense of what the fuck is going on. Speaking of what the fuck is going on, this is where I was going to have a little section on like trying to analyze the story and going over the funky specifics, because it's got a really cool way of actually going through it. But in trying to write this section and in going over my footage, I don't really have the words to properly discuss the weight of this story. No one is having a good time in the world of the short message. These are scarred people who are looking for an escape, for security, and for meaning. It tackles things like suicidal tendencies and what can push a person to them, repression of memories, guilt, and just what it means to be worth living. There's also a pretty heavy through line throughout the game about generational trauma. The fictional town of the game, Kettenstadt, Germany, is a shit tip. It fell into a state of disrepair decades ago, and despite continued attempts, it never got back on its feet, which fostered poverty and a sense of isolation, which resulted in higher crime rates and abuse. Anita is a victim of this trauma, and it's quite the journey to see all that she's been through because of it and how that affects the direct plot of the story. There's bullying, neglect, the influences of social media on young people. It's just a long list of not terribly nice topics. But you know what really struck me about the game and what had me wanting to make this video in the first place is that it chooses to be hopeful at the end. Not happy, by no means happy, but hopeful. I've decided not to get into spoilers. It's a 2-hour long game. If you really are interested, you can go and beat it in an afternoon. But I will say that the ending had me a bit teary-eyed. I'm lucky enough to have never gone this steep, but I've had my struggles, especially mentally. I know how important it can be to just have someone there and tell you that those things you can't stop blaming yourself for, they aren't the end of the world. This planet will always be a better place with you in it. And I don't know, it was really nice to see a game push that after a bit of a trauma-filled couple of hours. So while the game isn't perfect, not even close, and it almost completely fumbles it at the last stint of gameplay, I really like it. It's got great presentation and atmosphere, it plays well enough, the performances are fantastic once you get past the non-existent lip sync, and they've got these really neat live-action cutscenes, which they don't use a ton of, but they're there, spread in, and they're really important for the story, so they're really nice to have. The plot is deep and gripping, and I think it has a satisfying conclusion while still delivering on the grimier side of Silent Hill. And to go back to the point of Silent Hill's revival, all the short message needed to do was not suck, to serve as a reminder of what Silent Hill is capable of, and hopefully a taster of what is to come. If the short message was all we'd had, I'd be quite comfortable in saying I'm excited for what the future of Silent Hill looks like. But it's not, is it? Now we have to have a little talk about Ascension. Remember that interactive Black Mirror movie that came out a couple of years ago? That's basically what Ascension was. It was a series where viewers made choices that influenced the narrative, and it succeeded in being a complete disaster. I've not heard a single good thing about the show's quality, from its writing to its presentation, and Lord knows it was a terrible viewer experience. Just take a look at this. Really breathe it in. It's horrible. This actually came out a few months before the short message, more at the end of last year, but I don't consider it the start of the Silent Hill revival for a couple of reasons, one of which being, it did Silent Hill no favours. It isn't a game, and without the short message, Silent Hill would be currently standing on much worse footing. There's also a not insignificant amount of skepticism around the Silent Hill 2 remake. Either it isn't being marketed very well, or it looks a bit too action heavy. Either way, it's all conjecture until we actually get to see and play the game properly, but it's not a great start either. Ascension, the imperfections of the short message, and the skepticism around Silent Hill 2 are why I say cautiously optimistic. The short message feels like a vote of confidence in what Silent Hill has coming up, and at least conceptually, I'm still very excited in what Silent Hill F has to offer. But for now, all we can do is wait, because the Silent Hill revival has only just begun. So, welcome to Silent Hill. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you have seen the Resident Evil video, you will not be surprised to hear that I have not played a single one of these games outside the short message. And that's kind of the point. I got so excited after playing the short message because it got me really interested in what Silent Hill actually has the potential to be. Again, just like Resident Evil, I'm very aware of what Silent Hill is, what it looks like over its time span and stuff like that. I just haven't played them. So now I'm just kind of joining the culture and hoping that Silent Hill does not take the same trend it took through the 2000s. Anyway, that's enough yammering out of me. I just wanted to try and get a quick one out before Season 1 of Suicide Squad. I've been playing it this morning and it's been interesting. I'm still going to try and make the video. I just don't know how it's going to turn out anymore. Fun fact about that is, while I was writing this literal sentence, the one I am currently speaking through, the servers had been down for 8+ hours to an eventual 9 as they tried to launch Season 1, so I can only assume they horrifically broke something. Can't wait.